For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathryn McClymond. I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs in the college, and I'm a professor in the Department of Religious Studies. First of all, thank you for making time. I know this is an incredibly busy time of the year. This is probably one of the last things you wanted to add to your calendar at last notice. I apologize for that. The good news is that the dean was permitted to make a lot of hires on relatively short notice, and we want to take advantage of that. But we also want to make sure that we do it using best practices. So we designed the workshop that I'm going to take you through with an eye toward getting you going as quickly as possible, giving you the foundations of best practices to get you going on the right foot, but with the full understanding that this isn't everything you need. This is a really abbreviated training. So you'll see at the end, we've got some ideas for next steps. One thing I want to say is please feel free to email me or call me or set up an appointment with me through Sabrina anytime you need it, and we will keep you going and keep you moving as quickly as possible. So the format for today is I've asked you to set aside 2 hours. We are not going to take that entire 2-hour period of time because I don't think we need to do that for the full presentation. But I wanted to allot that amount of time so that I can also hang around for questions and answers. So I will stay here as long as you need me afterwards. What I am going to do is share my screen in a minute and walk you through some slides. The slides will be sent to you after this session is over, so don't feel like you need to scribble everything down. But I haven't sent them to you in advance because I've learned through many years of teaching that when you do that, the students don't pay attention to you. They look ahead in the slides. So that's why I'm not sending them to you in advance. I am also going to send you to several websites, and the links to those websites are also included in the slides. So you don't have to scurry to write those down, but please, if you have questions, let me know. We are also recording this session. I will try to remember to turn it off when we get to the Q&A sessions at the time, but we will for sure cut that out before we send that on to anyone else. If at some point you're uncomfortable with something that was recorded, let me know. Don't hesitate to let me know, and we'll make sure that that disappears. And then the last thing is that when I start sharing my screen, it's really difficult for me to see the chat. So I will keep checking back in on the chat, but if you put a question in the chat and I don't get back to you right away, that's why. It's because I'm trying to make sure that I'm sharing the screen with you. So before we get going and I switch over to sharing my screen, are there any questions or concerns anybody wants to raise, or something you just want me to keep in mind as we're walking through the slides?
Yes, Catherine, a quick one. I
Yeah.
attended a similar session maybe a year back or so. Is it any different?
A little bit of difference in terms of the paperwork process.
Okay.
After that, it's the same. So
Okay.
you'll probably be able to tell pretty quickly when it starts feeling familiar.
Okay.
Okay. One of the reasons we're running this session is because search committee chairs tend to shift over time. So the person who chaired a search for you last cycle is probably not the same person who chaired the search this time around. Eventually, our goal is going to be to train everyone. In fact, our plan had been that this year would be the year we would ask entire search committees to go through the training. It just seemed logistically really impossible to pull that off right now. So this is our plan B. But I am happy to come to departments to meet with entire departments. I'm happy to come meet with your search committee. I'm happy to meet with you one-on-one. Whatever would be helpful after this training, I will do. Okay. Anything else before I get started? Okay, all right, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to ask that if you will please mute yourself. It just makes it a little bit easier on the audio, and then I will check in occasionally for Q&A. So here we go. Let me get to sharing my screen here. Okay, so you should be able to see a slideshow on my screen that says Search Committee Chair Training. If you can't see that, please unmute yourself now and let me know. Okay, so I'm going to take that as a thumbs up from everybody. All right, so It's called Search Committee Chair Training. What I really want to emphasize here is that the focus today is going to be on launching your department search. Obviously, searches take multiple steps, and we're really focused on the beginning steps right now. And then we'll circle back later to talk about when it gets complicated. In particular, the virtual campus visit can require some thought. I won't get into a whole lot of details about that in this session, but I'll circle back to that later in February. And again, I'm happy to come talk to you in your department about how to do that. You can always contact me at any time if you have questions. And again, these slides are going to be sent to everyone following the training, so you don't have to write all of this down. I want to start by noting explicitly what informs the best practices that I'm about to talk about with you. First of all, as a state institution, we have certain processes that we have to follow, and you all know that. There are legal processes that we have to follow, there are HR requirements, and there are Board of Regents requirements as well. The problem that presents to many search committees is that many steps occur above the department and even the college level, and at this point, even beyond the university level, that take a little bit of time. So make sure you recognize that while we're moving everything as quickly as we can, there are going to be moments sort of silence in the process where we are waiting to hear back. You will always receive an email from Teresa Rucker to you as the search committee chair, copying your department chair and copying me, notifying you of the status of a search. So if you ever feel like I'm not quite sure where this search is right now, if you go back into your inbox and just search for Teresa's name, you'll probably pull up that email that'll give you the status. If you have trouble deciphering what that means in terms of the status, just give me a call and I'm happy to let you know about that. It is very difficult for Teresa to simply respond to every single person's email whenever you just feel like, oh yeah, what's the status of my search? Just because of time pressures. So just let me know if for some reason you need to advance it. If you're starting to feel time pressure with a candidate in particular toward the end of the search, I can help with some of that, but we can't skip any of the required steps. So there's the whole required process piece of it. But we've also rethought this training in light of values at the university and specifically the College of Arts and Sciences level that I always want to name every time we look into these trainings. We have a college strategic plan, and the dean takes that strategic plan very seriously. We have two underlying values that inform everything that we do in the other 5 pillars of the plan. Number 1 is to hire for excellence and inclusivity, and number 2 is focused on mentoring. And so I want to make sure I point everybody back to places where you can find out more about what's going on for those efforts. If you go to the Faculty Affairs website, you'll get information on mentoring in particular. We had lots of things through Research Reboot last week. We have one-on-one mentoring that's always available, targeted mentoring for certain needs, that kind of thing. So please be aware of that. And I mention that because I will talk about that with every candidate that you bring to campus as well. And so we work really hard to make sure that people, when they come on campus, learn about those opportunities. But second, then, this is where our training lives, which is the session Hire for Excellence and Inclusivity. The strategy that we use that informs everything that we do is a strategy focused on process and policy rather than on interpersonal approaches to addressing bias. This is not anti-bias training that we're talking about in this context right now. And there are several reasons for that. But the key thing for me is that there are so many people involved over a long period of time that it's really difficult to sustain anti-bias efforts and to monitor them on an individual level. It is more effective, according to higher ed research, to build process and policy efforts and strategies into the infrastructure of hiring to get to the results that we want. So that's what you're going to see baked into the process I'm about to lay out for you. One of the goals that we have as a college is to increase the diversity of our faculty. And as we developed that as a priority, there were lots of questions around, well, how do I know what that is? What does that look like? I want to point you to one source of information that's discipline specific. If you go to the NSF data regarding recently awarded PhDs, they break out that information by general field. And on this slide, I don't know if you can see it on my screen, the website is here, nsf.gov/statistics, and then there's a survey of doctoral degrees. And you can get that information sliced and diced in multiple ways. And I want to emphasize that this is not just data for people in the natural and computational sciences. The NSF actually offers data across the full range of fields that you find in arts and sciences. So I would recommend you take a look at that to see sort of where your department lies relative to the current percentage breakdown of the demographics in the field. And I can, again, walk you through that at some point if you'd like. So as we frame our hiring process, we're trying to keep in mind the required processes in terms of making sure we're meeting legal standards, HR standards, Board of Regents standards, but we're also trying to keep these values in mind, in addition, of course, to the university commitment to diversifying the faculty and improving the climate for all faculty. So that's our goal and our thinking here. What I want to do now is walk you through an overview of the search and hiring process, and it has changed slightly in the last couple of years. So those of you who've run searches in the past, some of this is going to sound familiar, and some of this may be a little bit new. So that's why I wanted to walk everybody through it. First of all, you have to secure official approval to hire. What has happened so far is that the dean has made the case successfully to the provost that we have instructional needs and that we cannot meet the demand the university is giving to us with the current staffing. You guys know that better than I do based on the teaching that you're having to do right now. And so the provost has given the dean permission to a hire, and the dean has decided that that hiring is going to be focused in non-tenure track lines. For most of you, that means you are hiring lecturers for next year, if it's any kind of a regular faculty hire. Your department chair received an email from Sarah, from the dean, authorizing the department to make a hire. And in that email, there was a description of what that position was meant to address in terms of instructional demand. And I want to mention that because that should inform your job ad language. And we'll talk about the job ad language a little bit later. If you haven't seen that email, I would recommend you ask your department chair if you can see it. It's really short. There's nothing in there that's confidential. It includes a salary cap, but it also includes this description about the courses that have to be met. Now, it may be that in your department, you're going to do some sort of dominoes thing where in order to meet the demand that's outlined in that email, you want to shift some instructional effort. So it may be that you're not hiring directly to meet that named demand, but the outcome at the end of all of this has to be that the department is able to meet that need. So again, it may be the person you hire, but it also may be that the person you hire relieves pressure someplace else so that you can meet that demand. If you're having issues thinking that through, I'm happy to talk through that with you. But all of that is laid out in the email that your department chair received. Following that email, your business manager received an email from Teresa Rucker. And that email said that the department needs to contact Shedrick Stevenson. He's working up in budget and finance up in the dean's office for a newer vacant 1 USG position number. This is the place where I feel like probably eyes are glazing over and I'm going to start losing people. Don't worry about this. The only reason I want you to know about this step is because it takes a little bit of time. Your business manager is likely the person who does this. And so by now, they should have contacted Shedrick Stevenson, received that 1 USG position number. If they haven't, you want to sort of ask your department chair, has this been arranged? And that's just an email to Shedrick. It shouldn't take very long. Again, if you have issues with that, let me know. But just so you have this, Teresa emailed the business managers 2 days ago. So they have the email. There's lots of detailed information in there that you don't need to worry about. After you have this email from Sarah and your business manager is off finding the one USG position number, your number one task is to work with your department to develop your job ad. I recommend that you run a rough draft of that by me before you submit the official paperwork. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I am going to look over the job ad when it comes up to the dean's office before it goes on to Sarah for approval. And I've got a little checklist that I'm going to run through to make sure that it meets certain requirements. Number one, I make sure that the job ad is for the right position. I make sure that the start date is right. I make sure that the salary cap is within the range of what we were talking about. But more importantly, your job ad is going to be the basis for all of the evaluation of candidates moving forward. So I'm looking at your job ad with that in mind. I also want to make sure that you haven't unknowingly narrowed your pool with how you phrased things in the job ad in a way that you don't really need to. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute. Part of that is just a lot of people have job ads sort of in the department files. And so they just go pull out an old job ad. They change the start date. They change maybe the title of the area of expertise, and then they send it on forward. And then they get an email back from me and I say, no, you can't use this. So take some time to think through it. I've got people sending me drafts of job ads all the time. I'm happy to turn around as quickly as I can. The other thing that I see people not think about in a job ad is it can be really dull. I've read some job ads where you couldn't pay me enough to take the job they described because immediately it focuses on your responsibilities and your duties and your expectations. And of course, those are real. But first of all, we want to get people excited enough to submit the application in the first place. So please think about how can you write this job ad, keeping your disciplinary norms in mind in a way that makes it sound like this would actually be an exciting department to join. Now, some people, when I've said that to them, have said, we don't have to worry about that. We always get hundreds of applications. And frankly, in this job market, we could hire somebody tomorrow. Yeah, you could hire somebody tomorrow, but I want you to attract the best possible candidate. And inevitably, when we get down to the final moment of recruiting top candidates, they often have other options. And you want to be the place that they want to land. So think about that from the very beginning. What is the message you want to send about your department, the kind of place it is to work in, positive, I hope, that you want to convey the whole way through the search and recruiting and onboarding process? Think about some of the hallmarks of your department that you want to appear in that job ad and go ahead and add that. The third thing that you want to think about in a job ad is I want to recruit a diverse, qualified pool, right? So how do I express that that's important to us? One of the ways I see people try to do that is with that little legalese language that we put at the bottom of every job ad that says, women and minorities are encouraged to apply. Yeah, that's great, but everybody says that. That doesn't really convince me that's a priority. Is there something else you can add to your job ad language that signals that this is important? Now, this is also where the law kicks in. We cannot simply say we want X kind of candidate and that's what we're going to hire. We're simply not allowed to do it, and that ad will not pass approval processes. What you can do is signal in meaningful ways, this is something we're trying to do. We are trying to diversify our applicant pool to secure the most diverse and highly qualified faculty we can. So one of the other strategies I see people do is talk about the Georgia State statistics. We have an incredibly diverse student body. If people know anything about Georgia State, they know that. Again, that's great, but that talks about the students. Why would a faculty member want to join? And there are a lot of things we need to do as work in the college and our departments in the university to address that. But one thing I would like to do is signal, at least in the job ads, that this is important to us and that we're going to work to make the climate as strong as we can. Love to have more conversations with you about that and things we can do, but just be aware that that's something you can think about in the job ad as well. When you have developed the job ad language and you've secured the one USG position number, or your business manager has, you've gotten a thumbs up from me on the job ad language, then you're ready to submit the official paperwork, right? There are 3 forms that accompany the job ad. And again, your business manager is likely the person who will fill this out. But if I have any questions about what's on the paperwork, I'm probably going to contact you and not the business manager, and I'll copy your chair. So you should know what's on these forms. All of these forms are available at this website, faculty.gsu.edu/, and it says for staff/hiring, but it includes the paperwork you need to hire faculty as well. First, you need something we call Appendix A, which is the faculty vacancy form. This is where you put the official request that we want to make a hire. So even though everything has been unofficially approved by the provost to the dean to your department chair, we have to do the official paperwork, and this is what launches that. On faculty vacancy form A, and I'll show images of this later, you put really basic things like what's the rank, what's the start date, which I think is just fall or August 2021. What's the type of appointment? What's the salary? And here you're just going to put a cap. What's the funding source? For almost all of you, that's simply state funds. What is the effort? Please remember that for a lecturer, the effort is 80% teaching, 20% service as a baseline, unless you've negotiated something different with Sarah. For tenure track faculty, obviously, it's different. Then there is this magic little box where you have to put in basically your description or your justification for the position. I think the easiest way to fill in that little box is to lift the sentence out of Sarah's email to your department chair that describes the need, and then add a couple sentences explaining how you cannot deliver this instruction without making this hire. I would recommend that as a starting formula. The second form that comes along with this is the new piece. And Larry, you mentioned you'd been through the training before, and a couple of other of you as well. This is the form that may not have been in place the last time you had to make a hire request. The critical hire form was put in place basically by the Board of Regents about a year and a half ago, when budget pressures started increasing and they were concerned about the university's hiring. They were concerned about salaries, a bunch of other things that lead to political conversations that I can't go into right now. But the key thing is that any person who met certain criteria in either a staff or a faculty hire in a what we call permanent or regular position had to be approved at the Board of Regents level. Some of you are living with this right now in terms of your staff hiring, and you know it can take a while because every staff request for a certain level and above now has to be approved all the way through the Board of Regents. For faculty members, it's a little bit different. We can have the president sign off, and then the approval circles back to us, so it doesn't take nearly as much time. But the president does have to report that he signed off on the faculty hire and report that up to the Board of Regents. So even though it doesn't slow us down quite the same way, it still does get a certain level of Board of Regents scrutiny. On the critical hire form, you will feel like you are doing classic bureaucratic extra steps, because you will repeat some of the information that is on Appendix A. That is not your imagination. You are in fact repeating some of that, but it's because the critical hire form has to go up to the Board of Regents. You also will have to write a paragraph explaining why it is critical to make this hire. And that's why it's called a critical hire form. You have, again, a lovely box where you have to put text in. And I would recommend that you use the exact same language that you put in the paragraph on faculty vacancy form A, put it right back on critical hire form. You can do the same thing. The key thing is that you are making an argument to not just the dean, not just the provost, but to the president and indirectly to the Board of Regents that you cannot deliver the instruction that your unit needs to deliver if you cannot make this hire. We've not had any pushback on this, just so you know. We don't anticipate any, but we have to submit the form. Again, if you have trouble filling it out, just let me know. I'm happy to help with that. And then finally, the third form that accompanies the job ad is Appendix B. This is your search committee composition. And I want to mention this because some people have asked things about who they can include on a search committee. You actually have a lot more options than you may realize. Obviously, any regular faculty member may participate in a search committee, but so may grad students, so may visiting faculty, so may alumni or community partners, faculty members from another department, anyone who you think should inform this process may serve on the search committee. The flip side of that is that you don't have to put everyone whom you want to consult onto the search committee to get their input. It may be that you've got someone that you really want to have some input at a certain point, but they're already overburdened with a lot of service or they just don't have time. It's not an all or nothing proposition. So think about who needs to be in on the search from point A to point Z, and where might there be opportunities to bring other people's input in a campus visit, other kinds of considerations. They still have to follow rules about confidentiality. We'll talk about that. But you want to make sure you think about whose voices would it be important to include. The other thing you want to think about is, and this is really going to the heart of your role as the search committee chair, is that your primary job is to safeguard process. It is not to make sure that the person you like the most gets hired. Your job always ought to be, what's the process here? What's the next step? What would be helpful to advance the conversation? How at the end of all this, can we be confident as a department that people got their questions answered, so that when we ultimately make that hire, everybody feels secure about having had a voice and being able to participate and getting their concerns addressed. One piece of this is making sure that everyone in the search gets a chance to express their views without fear of repercussion. And by that, I mean, we all know there are power dynamics at work in departments. There are power dynamics at work in search committees, particularly if you start including, for example, graduate students. Think about, how are we going to involve that graduate student so that she feels free to make her comment and her observation, even if she's disagreeing with another member of the faculty on the search committee with whom she is or might work in the future. Right. Again, it's up to you to put processes in place that invite that kind of input. Okay. So I'm going to stop there just for a second. That's a lot of information, and see if I've got any questions before we go any further on that. I know it's a lot of information. For some of you, this is a new process.
Yeah, Catherine, Chris Good here.
Yeah.
I'm on that page and I'm seeing a critical hire justification form. That's the one you're talking about, right?
That's the one I'm talking about. Yep.
And
Thank you.
the language should reflect what's in the faculty vacancy form, which is Appendix A. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Just checking.
And it doesn't matter. You'll feel like you're repeating things over and over again. That's fine.
Catherine, I have a quick question that might be not related to what I'm trained for.
Sure.
But I want to hire a postdoc, so that would be a grant-based funding, and that would be also pure research. Is it essentially the things that you were talking about, like teaching appointment time, right? I basically just need to make it full research appointment, right? And
Correct. Yeah.
any shortcuts, that anything I could omit from those steps, or there's no shortcuts for that?
I don't think so, honestly. Depending on the, yeah, I mean, what I'm sitting here thinking is that because the funding source is not state funds, you may not
Mhm.
need the critical hire form.
Okay.
So I'm going to find that out and let you
Okay.
know,
Okay.
because that
Thank you
would
so much.
actually speed it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Catherine, I had one more of a comment.
Yeah.
We are filling out the forms that actually list all the committee members, and in particular the search chair. But it seems to be until this is approved, we don't really know if the college level is approving this committee, in particular the search chair. But it is the search chair who has to fill out the form. Is there anything before that we need to negotiate to set up the committee, or is this internal to the department?
It's internal to the department. I will let you know if there's a concern about who the search chair is. You would have heard by now from me. All of you who are here, it's fine. You would have heard by now if there were a concern.
Good.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, so let me go back to the slides and we'll duck into the process again. So, okay, so this is going into sort of a little more detail on the process. So at this moment in time, we're going to imagine that you have sent forward your paperwork, the job ad, the Appendix A, which is your faculty vacancy request, the critical hire justification form, and Appendix B, which is your approval of pool. Right? You have sent that forward, and it goes at that point to Teresa. So some of you have sent some of these forms directly to me. I'm happy to review those, but do be aware that the official process goes to Teresa, and then she is in college HR, Teresa Rucker, and she creates the log in our college HR process so that we can track this from moving forward. When Teresa receives the paperwork from you, she does a quick look over, then she sends it to me, and I look over all the documents that I have in front of me to try to make sure that it fits what Sarah authorized, the salary makes sense, the rank start date is correct, all those other things. And then I sign off on it, and then I send it to Sarah. And my goal is that by the time it reaches Sarah's eyes, it's clean. Like she doesn't have to see any of the mess that we've all negotiated in the past. So theoretically, that all happens really quickly. It's all digital at this point. And so I do an electronic signature, Sarah gets electronic signature, Teresa automatically gets the paperwork back. She sends it up to the university. At that point, she will email you being the search committee chair, also your department chair, and me saying that has advanced to the university. At that point, it'll sit there a few days before it gets signed. You should not post your job ad until you hear back from Teresa that it has been approved at the university level. I know that's incredibly frustrating because sometimes it sits there for a few days. If you get antsy, please let me know, and I can gently nudge Reed Tankersley, who's the person that I nudge, and sort of see how quickly we can get things in front of the provost. I can't nudge for everyone, and I can't nudge all the time, or it starts being meaningless. But if you have a real time pressure going on, like in some cases, I know we've had hires where there's been external funding as a piece of it, and there was a clock ticking. Please let me know that, and I'll work with Teresa and Reed to see if we can prioritize some of that, but we can't prioritize all of them. What you can do, though, is consider where you're going to post beyond just the regular places that we post. All right, so there are a couple of outlets where the university just will automatically post. We can always post in the Chronicle. We can always post on the Georgia State website. Some of you have, all of you, I'm sure, have professional organization sites where you can post. I always make sure we post on the Black Doctoral Network site, and they distribute that. There are a couple of other organizations where they will help us get our ads out in front of qualified, diverse pools. Where it's appropriate, I go to the Mellon Foundation, and they often are working through various programs with PhD candidates who are soon going to be looking for positions, and they can put those higher opportunities in front of them. So I will take care of those kinds of things, but I am always looking over to see where you're posting to see if I can help with that. You can also do unofficial recruiting. So let folks know that you anticipate posting a job very soon. You can do that. So pick up the phone, call your networks, let folks know, any day now we expect this position to be posted. Can you think of candidates that we should be talking with? Can you think of organizations we should be reaching out to? I know that in a recent search in my own department, we knew of certain sort of subsections of our professional organization where likely candidates might be connected, and we tried to get the job ad out in front of them. I'm sure you guys have similar networks. So you can go ahead and do that piece of it, but let them know this isn't an official job posting yet. The other point related to that is that bake in some time before you're going to start reviewing candidate files, knowing that it's going to take a little while to approve on our end, and then you want to be able to post it for a while. You also don't want to put in a review deadline that is a true deadline for review of applications. It is better to say something like applications will begin to be reviewed on March 1st, 2021, and the position will stay open until it is filled. Something like that, that gives you some opportunity. One of the reasons that can be useful is if you make a hire and then something happens and that person isn't able to come, Teresa can close down that offer and just basically say that the offer was declined, and your search is still open. You don't have to start all over again. Right. So there are things that are easier if you keep that final close date an open date. Right. As that is happening, you're going to begin thinking about reviewing your candidate files. And this is the other really important step in the process that it's your responsibility to safeguard. Our strategy as a college is to encourage people to assess candidates not against one another, which is often how, at least I was trained to do it eons ago, but instead to assess each candidate relative to the stated qualifications in the job ad, not in comparison with one another. And I'm going to walk us through that again, because this is really critical to our process. Assess each candidate who submits an application relative to the stated qualifications in the job ad, not in comparison with one another. Right? And the temptation is going to be right away, you see a CV, you get excited, you think that's the one, that's the person we want to hire. You don't want to do that at this stage in the process. We want to take this a step at a time. The other thing you want to think about if we are assessing candidates relative to the stated qualifications in a job ad is we don't want those qualifications to be too narrow. Right? For example, if I were doing a hire for someone who was going to be hired into, let's say, the English department, it might be tempting to say, must have a PhD in English. Well, suddenly we find out there's somebody who came out of, I'll say a modern and classical languages program, and it turns out they really are a good fit for what you want done. Well, they don't meet the stated qualifications in the job ad. And it may sound little to you, but from an HR perspective, that person doesn't meet the qualifications, and it does actually create an issue. So what you might say instead is, candidates should have a PhD in English or a related field, something like that. in the original job ad, you want to think about expanding your funnel as wide as possible to invite as many qualified candidates in as you would like. Now, don't make it too big. You don't want to be looking at thousands of applications, obviously, but go back and think about the things you've sort of done automatically in the past in listing qualifications for a candidate, and think, do we really want that? Is that going to possibly exclude somebody that we might actually be interested in seeing? Right. So that's number one. Yeah, Chris.
Thanks, Catherine. I just had a really quick question about sort of equivalent advanced degrees. So since you mentioned it, are you aware of any policy that might prevent us from hiring somebody, for example, with an MD or a PsyD, assuming other
My
qualifications were met?
understanding is if there's a D, if there's a doctorate involved, you're okay. But if you would let me know that in advance, I will run that past the folks I need to make sure you don't get in trouble later. Yeah.
It's something that came up as we were just crafting some job ad language because we didn't.
Yeah. I
weren't
know
too sure about that.
this comes up on the arts times a lot. Typically, the language you're looking for is the terminal degree. So if it's the terminal degree in the field, yeah, I see you shaking your
Yeah,
head.
but
Yeah, it doesn't always work. Yeah.
to a lot of people that reads as terminal masters, great, that's me.
Oh, that's helpful to know. I hadn't I didn't hear it that way. Yeah. Yeah, let me think through with you as you're coming up with your language.
Thank you.
Okay. So let me just finish this one point and then I'll come out of the slide so I can see everybody's faces. Right now I can only see two, so I'm not sure I'm catching all the questions. And then the other thing you want to do is think about assessing candidates on the basis of their qualifications, not their credentials, right? For example, not that anybody in this room does that, but let's say you're getting 400 applications for a job. One quick way to minimize the review process is to say, okay, we're only going to look at people who got their credentials at an Ivy League institution. Okay, that's a credential. That's not a demonstrated qualification for the position, right? So don't rely on those credentials. Now, the caveat to that is in some of your disciplines, you actually do need a certification or a credential to be able to do certain things. Obviously, that's different, and we can talk about that if you've got any concerns about it. But again, you want to think broadly, how do we invite as many applicants into this process as possible? So early on, think broadly about the qualifications and think broadly about how an applicant may have the ability to demonstrate those qualifications. It may not always be in a traditional academic setting. For example, lecturers traditionally are teaching intensive. It would be really tempting to say, please submit the equivalent of SEIs, student feedback for courses you've taught. Well, you may get somebody apply for the position who hasn't taught a course in an academic institution where student evaluations were generated relative to their instruction. I mean, that's a whole lot of hurdles right there. Are there other ways that someone could demonstrate that they are effective at teaching beyond student evaluations, which are problematic for so many other reasons also, right? They may have done teaching in a different setting than a traditional academic setting. Think about what that might be. Now, you still may come back and say, no, Catherine, we really need X, and this is why we need it. That's fine. I just want to make sure you've given yourself the option to think about how you can broaden your pool and then choose consciously to narrow it rather than it happening sort of by default and then further down the road finding out, oh, we really restricted ourselves here. So again, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second and see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any hands up in the chat. Not seeing any hands. Okay. All right. So I will keep going. And
Catherine, this is
yeah.
Hyun. Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there any minimum number of candidates we need to get to
Yes,
review?
and we'll get to that in a minute, but
Okay.
the shortest list of names you want to send my way is 3. And some of it depends on what you want your process to look like moving forward. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
All right, thank you.
I'm not too worried about that for any of the positions that I know about right now, but it could be the case that that would be a challenge.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay, go back to the slides here. Okay, so this is going to be sort of repeating those key points, and we're going to move forward. There are 3 what I call sweet spots to generate a diverse and a highly qualified pool. And my experience is that these feel front-loaded relative to more traditional hiring practices. Many of us have been in a situation where the search committee quickly drafts a job ad, they post it, and nobody in the department hears anything until suddenly the search committee comes to a department meeting and they have a list of candidates they would like to invite to campus, and they are scrambling trying to plug people into the holes of that person's campus visit, and that's when you get a lot of the heavy lifting across the entire department. I would like that heavy lifting to occur earlier on because it helps avoid the problems that can happen later on down the road. And these are the moments to do that. One is the creation of the job ad. Spend some time with your colleagues thinking through, what do we actually want? What do we actually need? And again, I know a number of you have done that already, and you've, in most cases, if not all cases, I've sent it back to you with a few questions. Trying to increase the pool that might come your way. As you are creating the job ad, remind your colleagues that what they say in the job ad is what you're going to use down the road to make the decision who you want to recommend for a hire. And that's not just in the department. That's also when you make the case to the dean and to the provost. Because as Sarah is looking at the candidate that you recommend, and she looks over all of these, and she looks over the CV, she is also looking at that initial job ad, and she is looking at that initial email that she sent to your department chair authorizing this hire. And sometimes she has questions about, how does this person do the work that we said we were going to hire to make happen? You want to make sure that you've used those qualifications consistently. I think the other reason to do this is to be transparent with the candidate. They have a right to know what they're being hired to do, and that this hire didn't just sort of emerge fully formed, out of the mass chaos and void of the universe. There is a historical, instructional, economic context that prompted their hire, and they're moving into that moment at Georgia State. Talking through them about the expectations of the job ed also helps them to get a sense of, oh, okay, I get it. This is what you need. This is what you're thinking about. And I think it gets the most positive responses then from a candidate in terms of what they bring to the table. The other time that is a sweet spot is during the posting and recruiting period. And we talked about this, that you don't want to just, Sarah calls this post and pray. You don't want to just post your ad and pray you get the right candidate. You want to post, but you want to post widely, and you want to recruit actively. I will also say, please remember that you are always recruiting, even when you're not actively recruiting. If you are out giving conference presentations, even if you're doing it virtually these days, when you're talking to colleagues in other professional settings or meetings, whether you know it or not, you are recruiting or not for your department. So departments get a reputation. And in this day and age, people also text each other. There are, as you guys know, discussion boards all around hiring. People often know your departments before they've come to campus. And so think about that. Are you sending a message that's consistent with what you want to be able to say in a job ad? And then thirdly, as you identify, and you want to do this with your whole department ideally, but certainly with your entire search committee, identify the required and the preferred qualifications for applicants. All right. And there is a distinction. Your required qualifications are the things that you see as the bare minimum. We absolutely have to have X in a candidate for that person to be considered for this position. If they don't have that, we take them off the list right at the first step. Right. Number two, there may be things that would be really nice to have, but if this person meets other required qualifications, they don't have to have this extra piece. That extra piece is what I would call a preferred qualification. It may be an area of research. It may be, I was going to say in this day and age, online teaching, but you might want to make that required at this point. You know, are there certain skills, certain certifications that, yeah, it would be great if they had that, but we don't really need it. We can address that. Think through really carefully what's going to be required and what's going to be preferred, right? And the key thing is to do this before you start looking at individual applications. The messes often arise when you're having the conversation about what you really need and don't really need at the same time that you're talking about a couple of, quote, real people, because then that preference for that person gets tangled up in the need for the department. Ideally, you have that conversation beforehand. Doesn't always play out that way. This is a path forward with some ideal sort of guardrails to keep us moving forward, but we all know sometimes hires get messy. This is a strategy. And then fourth, and I've said this before, you want to evaluate candidates in relationship to the qualifications, not by comparing them to one another. Ideally, that doesn't happen until the very last step, and you're really lucky and you have several candidates, all of whom are great in different ways. And then your department is making some choices about, well, what are our priorities? And because of those priorities, we're going to go with this candidate with the understanding that, you know, these are all terrific people that we're looking at. The final thing that you can do as the search committee chair, as you are paying attention to these sweet spots, is to encourage your faculty not to leap too far ahead in the process, right? So don't try in step 3 to already figure out who you're going to hire. You want to evaluate candidates according to the qualifications. The only decision you're making at that step is whether you're advancing a candidate to the next round, right? You're not saying we'd hire this person, right? And the reason that's important is because as you move candidates, let's say from that first review up to the next step, whether that's a long list of people that you WebEx or Skype or Zoom with, or an actual on-campus visit, you're not committing to offering a hire to anybody yet. You're identifying, okay, they've met this bar and we need to know more. And we want to think about what that more is. And we all want to agree on what that more is that we need to know. And then we organize the next step so that we learn that information. So again, that's a process step. One other thing that I want to note here, and this sort of hits in a number of different parts. As you put in the job description, please note that 80% is instruction, I said this before, and 20% is service. And I just want to note that in the Dean's office right now, we are going over the coach faculty survey data specific for the college. One of the key things that comes up almost across every single rank, and most of you I'm sure are aware of this, is that we have a real problem with inequity in service. There are people who feel like they do way too much service and it's not rewarded, and people who don't do enough service don't have any real meaningful consequences. I just want to signal to you that that is on our radar, that we are working on that, but it means that I'm really paying attention to the service component of the lecturer's position, probably in a way that we haven't paid attention to it before. So I'll want to think through with you how that's playing out. Please also keep this in mind as you're putting together your search committees. It's really easy to lean on certain people to do the search committee work, who may be people who are already heavily doing service. think about how you can distribute that equitably in your units. And again, I'm happy to talk with you about that more. So the next step that happens is advancing the candidates. And this is where we get to Hakeem's question. So you have received your applications. You have waited until the date you set in the job ad to review those applications as a committee. You've had a conversation as a committee, and you've identified the candidates who meet just the minimum bar. At this point, you have a couple of decisions to make, and a lot of it is going to be driven by time and by the number of candidates you're dealing with. When you go the next step, you are going to notify the dean's office and then by extension, the provost and other folks of the pool of candidates that you would like to give further consideration to. That's what approval of pool means. It is asking permission by the dean and the provost to take the next step with a pool of candidates for further consideration. Typically, you want this list to be long. And so you want to mark it in a way, and I'll show you how in a little bit, that lets you take any of the candidates on that list all the way to the final step of review. But it may be that you want an intermediate step in there. If you have a lot of candidates and you don't want to bring them for, quote, a campus visit, you do the intermediate step, what many of us call the long list. And this is where you narrow your pool down. Typically for many departments, it's between 10 and 15 candidates. You come up with questions to ask through WebEx interviews or some other platform. And then you narrow from that list to the list of names for campus interviews, right? Again, this depends on your timing. But when you submit your approval pool, that's when you get permission to do that next step. Again, you may not do that until the pool has been approved at the dean and the provost office level. And the dean has at times, and not this provost, so the previous provost has at times come back and said, not so much. I don't want to bring that person here for whatever reason. So it can get a little awkward if you've already notified that person that you want to meet with them. So think about that before you take the next step. So I'm going to pause here and again, check in and see if there are any questions, and then we'll go back to this process. Any questions? Yeah, Gabe.
Yeah, hi, Catherine. Just for clarity, and I've got some specific questions for you that apply to mine, but just more generally, that long list, is the recommendation to do WebEx interviews with everybody who's in the pool that you've had approved?
So you can set it up one of two ways. You can set it up so that that happens, or you can send a list forward and you can say, we're going to start with a subset of that group.
Okay.
And you want to, I'll show you how, but there's a way to mark on that form that that's what you want to do. I think a lot of it depends on the pool that you have, how many people we're actually talking about in terms of whether you go one way or the other way. If you're in a really specialized search, like the one I think you are talking about right now, you may feel like you've got a small enough number of people that you want to take all of them to the next stage.
Yeah, in our case, we already have an approved pool, and we're going to be adding to it. So that gets into more specifics. So I'll leave that for a separate conversation.
Okay, but that's a good point. That sometimes happens where you've sent a pool forward and for whatever reason you feel like you want to add a name to it. You can do that. That's just an amended pool. We just have to do it. And so let Teresa know that you want to amend the pool, or contact me. You can always contact me and I'll tell you how to do that. It's relatively painless, but we still have to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Rush, I think you had your hand up too.
I did. So we thankfully have more than one search. And when I'm thinking about pools, if someone applies to one, but we think they would be a better fit for another, is that phrased in a certain way, or
I'm
how
really,
would we?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. So what you can do is notify Teresa that you have, what we do is we basically create one search for multiple positions that are close enough in how they are described. They're all lecturers in whatever area we want to say, so that you can share the search committee, which can be really useful, and so that if someone applies, they can be considered for any of those positions. I don't have your criteria in front of me right now, but there is definitely a way to structure it so that you can do that. If you don't do that, then you have to ask the person to apply for the search where you would like to consider them. They have to actually submit everything as if it's a brand new submission. And it's just a pain to do that. So there are ways we can set it up to avoid that. Okay, Larry, I think I
Thank
see your
you.
hand up.
Yes, I have a quick one here. So say I had at least, we had a huge pool of applicants. Say we received, say, 60 applications, and we've settled for a long list of, say, 10. Is it advisable at that point to inform the 80 that they are not competitive, or do we have to wait until the process is complete?
That's a good question. Typically, what I've recommended in the past is that you write the other 80 saying, thank you for your interest in the position. At this point, we are not advancing your dossier for the next round of consideration. So that kind of wording, I think, lets them know where they stand, which I just think is polite and collegial and human. But you don't, that also opens the door. If for some reason you decided you wanted to reach back into the pool, you could do that. So that's why the phrasing "at this point we are not advancing" is useful.
Thank you.
Okay. And just as a point of politeness too, at the end of the whole thing, when you've been extended an offer to somebody, or even along the stages, as Larry just asked, if you can, just to notify candidates where they are in the process is really useful. I can't tell you how often I've gotten an email from a candidate after a search was over who didn't get very far in the process, just telling me how much they appreciated how they were treated. That goes a long way toward building long-term goodwill. So yeah. Shaolin, I think you have your hand up.
Yes, I have a question. It's kind of specific to the position we are hiring. In terms of qualification, we are hiring an associate professor, but we do have some candidates, they are actually professors. So how to handle candidates like that?
That's a good question. So technically, they would have to understand that they are going to be hired into the rank of associate professor. If you want to make the case that the department, for whatever reason, would like to hire a professor, we should talk with Sarah sooner rather than later about that, because from an HR perspective, you cannot advertise a position at one rank and then hire into another.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Armin, I think your hand's up too.
Yeah, I just want to maybe give everybody a piece of advice as you are going through the list of your candidates. I do suggest that every search committee member and the chair in particular is maintaining a spreadsheet marking why a particular candidate may be discarded or disqualified, so that you have that as a record for later. So this has helped me in the past quite a bit to go back, and even if you have to reopen the search and go back into the pool, you know who you have. So it's really important to keep track of the decision process.
Yeah, let me build on that because there are a couple of things sort of embedded in what you said that are important. I want to clarify that the department chair is not a member of the search committee. You have a chair of the search committee, all you guys, and in the final steps, and we'll get to this, you will be writing a letter recommending a candidate to the department chair. That then goes into the packet and moves forward, and the chair also has to write a letter recommending. This also goes to the question about votes. I often get questions about who can vote, who cannot vote on a search committee. from a college and university point of view, anybody can vote because it doesn't really matter, frankly. I mean, you're making a recommendation. There is nothing binding about your recommendation officially on the department chair, on the provost, I mean, on the dean or on the provost. And we'll talk about this later in the search. Having said that, I would work really, really hard to make sure that by the time it gets to a recommendation to the chair, everybody at least feels like they've been included in the process. And that's where process matters, because even if you don't end up with somebody as a candidate that you want, at least everyone feels like their voice got heard. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that we are in a sunshine state. So while technically all of this is confidential, and I will advise you to keep the whole process confidential as appropriate, we'll talk about this in a minute, a candidate can come back and request to see any documentation that is produced around the search. So as you are doing the documentation that Armin referred to, I think that's a really good idea, but think about what you put down on paper. The line we always used to say with other chairs was, would you be comfortable with this as the headline on the AJC? All right, if you'd be comfortable with it on the cover of the AJC, you're fine, but just think about it before you write it down. So Armin, is your hand up again?
No, I think I'm good. It
Okay.
just didn't come down.
Okay. Okay, anybody else before I shift back? Okay, all right, so I'm going to go back to that slide and sort of pick up where we were. Okay, so you have your pool, you've put it together. These are the people that you would like to advance. You have sent it forward all the way up the food chain. It's come back down. At this point, you can do sort of what Larry was talking about. You can do two things simultaneously. One is let the folks know whom you are not advancing that that is the case, but use the language that I recommended because you don't know if you might want to revisit that pool. Number two, you then want to contact the candidates for the next step in the process. So let's assume you're going to do this long list series of WebEx interviews for 10 to 15 people. The point of these interviews is to find out whatever information the committee feels it does not have about the candidate's qualifications relative to the job ad. And I'll say that again because that's a lot of stuff packed up together. All right. The point of these interviews is to find out whatever information the search committee still needs to find out about the candidate's qualifications relative to the job ad. And I want to emphasize that because, again, we tend to have sort of in our departments a culture of doing certain things in the interviews and certain things in the campus interviews just because that's what we've done for the last 20, 40, 50 years. You want to think about, what do I still need to know? If I already know, for example, about their research, and I really, really want to know about their online teaching, or I really, really want to know about how they would construct a course that is part of a sequence in the major, make sure you bake that into your list of questions. The other thing about the questions is it is good to avoid hypotheticals. Best practices suggests that you don't want to ask, well, what would you do if? Imagine X. You don't tend to get the best answers there. It is better instead to say, can you give me an example of when such and such happened? That way you get behavior, and behavior-based answers tend to be the best answers. The other thing you can do is if you have a particular question that you want to ask a particular candidate, maybe you didn't get the information in that candidate's dossier about something you really wanted to know, you can build that into the questions. You just have to ask it of everybody. So think about if there are certain things you want to know about particular individual candidates, you can do that. You just want to make sure you ask the same question or a question that gets at that with everybody. You can also do follow-ups. So, everybody gets really worried, well, I have to do exactly the same thing for everyone. Well, depending on someone's response to a question, you may want to ask a follow-up afterwards that's unique to that candidate. That's absolutely fine. You just want to make sure that everyone gets asked the same bank of original questions so that when, again, you go back and revisit the conversations, you have an even playing field. And then the final thing you want to do in terms of those interviews is make sure you give the candidate time for Q&A. They should always have time to ask the questions they want to ask. I learn a lot about a candidate by what they want to know. It tells me if they've done their research. It tells me what their priorities are. It tells me what they value. Sometimes they want to know about resources that it somehow didn't cross my mind they might be interested in. All sorts of things. So make sure you build in that time as well. After the long list, then you can decide, okay, we want folks to come for what we used to have as in-person campus visits. This spring, they would be, barring really strange, unforeseen circumstances, virtual campus visits. We actually had this happen last spring when we made the pivot in, I think it was March 16th. We had a number of searches in process and they immediately had to flip to be campus visits. A lot of them were actually really successful. There are ways to set up a campus visit so that people get to meet who they want to meet. We had some people get really creative about using the map that's on the GSU website to virtually walk somebody around the campus. We had them arrange conversations with a librarian in their field. There are all sorts of conversations and things you can arrange in advance if you take some time to plan those campus visits. And we'll talk more about that at another time when you're closer to that process, but we can be creative about what that looks like. Right. After the campus visit, you then are going to sit down as a committee, look again back at the job ad, again back at the qualifications, and come to a decision. And this may take a few conversations to get to a point where the committee feels like they can recommend a hire. Again, it may not be a unanimous decision. That's okay. You just want to make sure that everyone has had a chance to express concerns they have, to get questions answered, to express their preference, their priorities, those kinds of things before you move to a place where a recommendation to the chair happens. At that moment, you as search committee chair will draft a recommendation to the chair, recommending a hire. Typically, this is very short. Typically, it's like a couple of paragraphs, and it will be accompanied by the CV. And again, I can help you with that and that paperwork at that point. At that moment, you as search committee chair, your job is basically over. From this point on, in terms of negotiations, making an offer, the ball will be in the chair's court, the department chair's court, and the department chair will reach out, usually unofficially, well, first to my office and to Sarah, and we will make sure that everybody's okay with a conversation. And typically your department chair will contact the candidate and say, we would like to recommend that Georgia State extend an offer to you. Please be very, very clear that no one in your department, including the department chair, makes an offer until the provost has approved it, right? We are not in a position to do that. Georgia State University extends the hire offer, and we will advance the paperwork. But you start the conversations so that we can negotiate startup, if there's credit toward promotion, salary. Sometimes candidates suddenly have other factors that didn't come up, or they didn't feel free to disclose until we get to this moment in the hire, and all of that needs to be addressed. So again, this can take a little bit of time, but those conversations will be your department chair's conversations and the dean's office conversations at that point. So in terms of looking ahead, at this point, what we've really done is talked about the initial paperwork, how you set up the job ad, and the key things I want to emphasize are taking the time to identify the criteria you're going to use to evaluate candidates the whole way through. What I haven't spent a lot of time on is on the campus interview, partly because we're just not there yet for most of you, but also because I find that gets really personal depending on the department and the discipline. So this is what we are sort of offering to you guys to move forward. I'm going to set up another session like this one focused on campus interviews, probably late in February. Come if you can, don't come if you can't. I know you guys are busy. It's easier for me if I put at least one shot on the calendar so people can try to come and we can record it again. But I understand you may not be able to make that. But as you begin designing your campus visit, consider, what do we still need to know about the candidate's abilities to meet the required and preferred qualifications of the job ad? That's a question I keep asking. What do I need to know that I don't know already? And various members of your search committees are going to get to answers to these questions at different times. All right. Your job is to help everybody move forward. It's not necessarily going to be something that gets advanced quickly to a point where everybody's comfortable. It's your job to work so that everyone gets a chance to feel like they got to ask the questions they needed to ask. The companion question for the campus visit is, well, what activities can I host virtually to answer that question? Do I want to see them interact with grad students? Do I want to see them working with the other, let's say you're bringing somebody in as a lecturer to work with another team of faculty to develop a certain curriculum? Do you want to host a conversation about that? The typical teaching a class online, you want to think about what's the best mode for that is going to be equitable, first of all, that everyone can have an equal shot at demonstrating their abilities, but also that really does show what they can do. Are there specific dedicated service responsibilities that this hire, if you're hiring an NTT person, is going to take on, and they should talk to somebody about that? Is it worth a conversation with somebody at CETLO, the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning and Online Education, about resources that they might want to know about that would facilitate their teaching? Things like that. So are there activities specific for what this person is going to be asked to do that you want to make sure you host in the campus interview? And then in addition, this slide just lists different ways that I can be available to you to work with your search committee, your department, you throughout the process. So I will stop sharing again, ask any questions, and then there are just a couple of other sort of pages that I want to take you to, including some of the forms, so we can actually look at them. Armin? You're muted, Armin.
How about now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, good. Do you happen to have a cheat sheet available regarding the topics that, as a chair, one would have to discuss with a potential candidate?
I don't, but that's a really good idea. I'll put one together.
Good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's a really good idea. Yeah. No, Armin, that's still your hand. Anybody else? Okay, so the last thing I want to do is just take you to a few sites that might be useful for you to see and be aware of. And the links to all these sites are in the slides, but for some of you, if this is the first time, some of these forms I've been referring to might sound a little abstract, and so I want to make sure that I've taken you there so you can see what they are. All right, so again, I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So this page here is the NSF Statistics Survey of Doctorates page. And if you go here, you can look in terms of research areas. So you could look at PhDs in terms of different fields. The humanities is in here somewhere. I'm not seeing it here, but all of them are listed someplace. You've got you've got socioeconomic sciences if you just want to focus on them. You can go based on years. I'm trying to go back to a site that I was at this morning. more recent data tables by survey. You can browse by institution profiles. You can generate your own data tables, which can be really helpful in some areas. So I would recommend, not necessarily now if you're pressed for time, but at some point get a sense of what are what does the PhD profile look like in academia right now? Where does your department fall in that? Because that's something we're going to be looking at the dean's office when you're sending pools up to us. We're going to look and see, do you have a diverse pool? If you don't, I will contact you and say, why isn't this more diverse? There may be a reason for that, but we are paying attention to that. And this is the place I will go to sort of see where you are relative to your discipline, to sort of see what's going on there. The other place that I want to take you to, so I got to move my screen down here, are some of the other websites. This is our college faculty affairs website. If you haven't been there already, I would encourage you to go there. We have down here tiles that take you to different things that include calendars and forms as well. The place I want to take you to is where it says Chairs Resources. If you click on that, it's going to take me a minute here. Sorry, it's thinking. There are a number of resources for the chair that we're beginning to populate, but that includes faculty recruitment and hiring. Right, so you're going to get hiring forms here, including the critical hire justification form, but also just some best practices around some of these stages of the search. All right, job ad and search committee composition, reviewing the candidate dossiers, including the spreadsheet, like what Armin suggested. There are some sample spreadsheets, interviewing candidates, things like that, as you're sort of thinking through your questions, what you want that to look at. The other place I want to go, I'm having trouble seeing it with the, let's see here. This is the university website for Office of Faculty Affairs. And they also have lots of resources available for search committees, including conducting inclusive faculty searches, a concise guide. They have, for your reference, the Georgia State University faculty hiring policy. So all of this is here just for your reference. And if you really need reading to help you fall asleep at night, here's the USG critical hire process. Not fun, but it's there if anybody wants to take a look at it. We've also got some offer letter templates, which can be useful as a starting point if you're helping to draft that. But again, we've got lots of questions. Also, things about joint appointments. I don't anticipate that's going to be an issue for most of you, but I know in at least one search going on in the college right now, we're talking about joint appointments. So here's some of the information on that and some of the others as well. And then the last thing I want to show is, this is the email that Teresa sent to your business managers, and it has on it faculty vacancy form A. This is where you're going to put the things like this lovely one USG position number. Don't worry so much about that, but non-tenure track for most of the positions that we're hiring into. It is an academic year appointment. In many of your cases, it is, yes, a new position, but not always. We can talk about that. Anticipated semester of hire, most of you, that's going to be fall 2021. Here is where the budgeted salary range will go, and that number was given by Sarah in the email to the department chair. And then the activity percentage, again, for most of the appointments you guys are hiring for, it's going to be 80% teaching, 20% service. For most of you, it's going to be 100% state funds. Rafal, in your case, that would be the 100% sponsored funding. And then, will this position require additional funding like startup from the Office of the Provost? Again, for most of the positions, the lectures that we're looking at, the answer is no. And then this is the lovely box where you want to put in that paragraph that we talked about that builds off of the language that Sarah put in her email to the chair. You will copy this language onto the critical hire justification form as well. Going back to faculty affairs, let me go back to, I'm trying to find the forms here. I just want to show you a couple of the other forms, mostly so that they look somewhat familiar to you. So we just looked at the faculty vacancy form A. You've got your search committee form B. This is the one that is the critical hire justification form. And here is where that narrative belongs that we just described. Salary, again, this is where you're going to be repeating some information that came from before. And again, if you have questions about what goes in any of these lines, if your budget or your business manager doesn't know the answer to that, I can help you, or Teresa can help you. And then this is your approval of pool form. Right? Couple of things on this form I want to mention. So you're going to put your date, your department, college, the job title. For most of you, that's going to be lecturer. Do not fill in anything about gender identity or race, ethnicity, anything like that. That information gets solicited by the university through a separate office. Candidates report voluntarily, and in many cases, they do not report their race or their ethnicity. So that other office will fill this in for us later. Please don't guess someone's gender identity or their race or ethnicity. Also, these categories are not categories we can control. We have asked numerous times over the last 5 years since I've been in the office to change this. And these are categories currently we are required to use. We've already had a number of times where this has created problems for a candidate. Please let me know if that happens, and I will work with you to address that problem. We have reported to the provost's office every single time there has been an issue to try to demonstrate that these categories are inappropriate. This is what we're working with right now, and this goes back to being a state institution. What you will do is list the applicants that you want to interview. Again, leave the race and the gender identity blank and mark final round interviews. You want to do this because this allows you to take someone through both a screening interview and a final round interview stage. So this is simply the shortcut to do that. And then you will sign, the department chair will sign, it comes up to me here, then to the dean, and then it goes to our affirmative action office to get reviewed. I won't go through the other forms, but again, they are all here if you ever want to take a look at them, and I'm happy to walk through them with you as well. So I will stop sharing at that point. All right, Larry, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering whether you have a template with the, a well-crafted language that will make somebody not so disappointed when they're told, hey, it's not working.
Meaning a candidate?
Yeah, they're not successful, but you want to make them feel like really good, but
yeah. So my rule of thumb is for the first round, if they don't advance beyond having submitted an application, they just get an email that says, we appreciate your interest in our department. At this point, I'm sorry to say we're not going to advance your candidacy, but we wish you the best, something positive like that. Beyond that, I suck it up and make a phone call. And just because I think people deserve that level of respect, and I do it really short and sweet. And so I'll say, hi, this is Kathryn, how are you? They'll say, oh, this is Larry, so happy to hear from you. And I'll say, I just wanted to call, I'm sorry, these are never easy, but we are electing not to extend an offer at this time. Basically, they don't hear a whole lot more that I say after that, is my experience. What I do say is it was a pleasure to meet you. I hope to see you at next year's American Academy of Religion conference. And I don't say much else. Usually at that point, people are very just grateful that they got a phone call, honestly. And I see them at the next American Academy of Religion conference. They come up, they say hi. Typically, they don't avoid me. What you don't want to say, and it's going to be really tempting to do, is, you know, you really were a wonderful candidate. We just had somebody who hit qualifications that you didn't have. Don't go there. Don't say anything about the person to whom you offered the job. Don't say anything about, you know, what they did or did not bring to the table. At that point, you know, the interview process is over, and you don't want to invite them to come back and say, oh yeah, I actually really do have that qualification. Can I send you such and such paper that I'm publishing next month? Yeah. There's nothing
Thank you.
magic about it. And typically, the department chair is going to make that call just to get you off the hook, just so you know that. Typically, the department chair. In some cases, that may be different. I don't know the culture in each of your departments. But yeah.
Okay.
And you don't want to make that call until an offer has been accepted. The formal offer has been extended by the university to the candidate, and the candidate has accepted in writing. Because until that moment, they can change their mind too. And even, and you know, sometimes it even happens after that, but you do not make that phone call until that happens. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? I'm just checking to see if there's anything else in the chat. Not seeing anything. Okay, so let me just close by saying I the dean, your department, the provost, everybody appreciates you taking on this work. This is, if not the most important task that we do in terms of service to our community, it's right up there. You're leading a process that is going to identify someone that hopefully is going to be a colleague in your department for a long, long time. If this goes well, that's what happens. And it can be very difficult. People feel vulnerable. But the other part of it is that people can also feel marginalized in the process. The temptation at sometimes, particularly in a moment like this, when we're starting this later in the year because of when funding was released, is to go too quickly. I would encourage you not to do that. Please don't rush this. And there are ways to keep things moving, keep people communicating with candidates, with your colleagues, so that they don't feel left in the dark, but don't rush it. Your job is really to make sure everybody gets considered, that you bring in the best pool of candidates to be considered, that you show off your department at its fullest. As you are working with your search committee, and we haven't spent a lot of time talking about this, please make sure that everyone gets a chance to contribute. All of you, I'm sure, have seen this, where you're in a meeting and theoretically everybody's in the meeting together, but some people's voices weigh more than others, and that can be really complicated to navigate. It's your job to be watching to see who's possibly in a situation where they may not feel like their opinion is getting noted, or maybe they want to communicate something with me. What I will encourage you to avoid is the informal conversation. It's really tempting. And when we were in person, these would be the water cooler conversations. You know, you'd have the official search committee meeting, and then you'd run into somebody in your department in the elevator and have a side conversation, and nobody else was in the room, and then go back to the meeting, sort of working together to make something happen. That should not happen. What you want is the conversations to be with the entire search committee, and then transparency as those get presented to your full department. Again, as you're bringing in multiple voices, particularly I think about, you know, grad students who join a committee, But other people as well, for various reasons, are going to feel less free to share their opinions for various reasons in your department or in the climate that we're in right now. Your job is to try to make it possible for them to give that information. Part of how you avoid that, for example, is not ranking and not starting with the most senior member in the department to give their rank. Please avoid that. Instead, if you create a process where you're always sitting there with the job description, and then you're walking through each candidate and their ability to meet or not meet these qualifications, and each candidate gets equal time and everybody gets to give their perspective on that candidate, you're far more likely to get a more nuanced view of that candidate than if people just walk in ranking, which is the old way we used to do it. The other thing I will tell you is, if this is a different search process for your department, expect it to be bumpy. We had a couple of departments over the last couple of years where this was really hard. It was like trying to learn to write left-handed if you are right-handed, or the other way around. It's not going to feel comfortable for some of your colleagues to do this process. That's okay. Honestly, I'm going to be more worried if we get to the end of this and everybody says, oh yeah, it was fine, smooth, no, not a problem at all. Because it probably means that we went down the path of least resistance and didn't push back at the moments that we needed to push back. So I'm okay with some discomfort and some bumps in the road. And I'm here if you just need somebody to brainstorm with. If for some reason you don't want to talk to me, and that's fine, we've got people who've been on search committees in the past who have volunteered to come and talk with other committee members as well. And that might be more comfortable for your department for whatever reason. So if you want that, let me know. I'll send you to those people. They won't report back to me on anything that they've talked about, but it may give you another resource and somebody that you can talk to. Okay. The final slide, and I won't bother to pull it up right now, but the final slide includes my email address, Teresa Rucker's email address, and then links to some of the resources on the college website and the university website. Please take some time to look over those. Feel free to share these slides with your department search committees. There's nothing confidential here. Everybody should know that this is the process that we're advancing. And as questions come up, feel free to let me know. Any other questions before we sign off? Okay, I'm going to decide that's because I was an incredibly effective communicator and not that you guys are all eager to get off the call, just because I want to believe that. So thanks for the time. I will sign us off now and hope to talk to you all soon.
You're awesome. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye. Lovely to see all of you. Talk to you
Kathryn,
later.
thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Kathryn.
Bye.